One of the questions you might have is, well, how do I even answer common interview questions? Now, this is super important to understand. There are two different types of interviews you're probably going to see in a technical field. One is a non-technical interview. The goal of that interview is to get the person to know, like, and trust you. The technical interview is different, and we won't be talking about it here today because it depends very strongly on what that job is. And that's where they ask you those technical questions. They may even have you do something like write a piece of code. Today, we're only going to be asking the question, how do I get the interviewer to know, like, and trust me? One of the very common questions we ask is something along the lines of, why do you want this job? It might also be something like, tell us about yourself, but realistically what we're asking is, well, why are you here? Why are we having this conversation? Let's think about what are we looking for. The first is interest. You've applied to this job, and we typically know that you've applied to many other jobs. You happen to get an interview here. So are you interested in being here, or did you just send out 100 applications and hope for the best? The next is excitement. So not only do you want to do the job, but it's going to really have a burning passion in you to do well. And finally, understanding. You understand the job. If you walk in and you don't give me an idea that you have a clue what the job is, then that's a big red flag. That's typically why we ask this question in the very beginning of the interview. So how do you answer it? Well, just like your resume, it should be specific mention of the job description. You should smile, seem excited, look as though you're really wanting to be there and really want that job. And finally, talk about how it fits in with your career goals. Now, that's something you might do, but if you're just looking for the job because you're just testing it out, you can be honest or you can leave it out. It doesn't really matter as long as we can see that excitement, because really, if we're hiring you, say, for a co-op position, it's only a 4-month commitment. You don't necessarily have to say, well, I'm going to be in this entry-level position forever and I would love that. That's not really what we're asking you to say. So here's an example. If I'm hiring a teaching assistant for a course, I might say, well, why do you want to be a TA? Why are we here? And a really good answer is something around the lines of, well, I really love teaching. So you're relating it to yourself. You obviously say something about the fact that you're teaching, and it's a job description. And I want to give back, helping students the way I was helped in my courses. So now it's a personal connection. I can see that excitement and that interest because you understand the job, because you've interacted with people in this job before. And then you might say, well, I'm considering a career as a teacher, and many people who want to be a TA typically do. And so I think this is a great stepping stone. It is. And if you're looking for just a simple co-op job with maybe 4 months and gaining that experience, that's okay to say. I'm just looking to see if this is for me. Another one is, why should we hire you? This one also might be, tell us about yourself. Why are you here? Some interviewers are quite blunt. And what are we looking for? The key thing is self-awareness. We're not looking for you to throw your other interviewees under the bus. Please never do that. We are very much looking for just you to show us that you understand who you are and why you want to be here. So how should you answer it? Well, the first thing is you should be confident in yourself and your abilities, but don't be arrogant. And that's where you're talking about other interviewers badly, or that's where you're talking about how amazing you are and how much better you are than anyone else in this job. Leave that alone. But be confident in what your own skills are. And then, related back to the job description and your skills, so if you just say, well, I'm a leader and I'm a really go-getter, that's not an answer to the question, really. We want to know why you want this job, and that's really what we're asking. Again, it goes back to the idea of we need to put you in a position where you are doing valuable work for us. So we want to see that you're able to do that and you understand it. So here's an example just for a web design job. Well, I've been building my own website since early high school. So this is something saying, I'm confident, I've done this before, I have the skills, and I'm very well versed in the design software you're using. So this is especially key if the company uses a particular thing that you know and are good at. You should mention that in the interview, and you should say, I understand your needs and I can do that for you. I think it's exciting to get an opportunity to show my skills in a job where lots of people can see them. So you're being confident, you're talking about your skills, but you're not being arrogant about them. You're just excited to show off what you can do. Tell us about a mistake you made. Now this sometimes comes up with, tell us about your greatest weakness, which is a particularly bad question to ask because it doesn't really help you to understand what the interviewee is about when they're coming into the job. Typically they have a prepared answer for this, but tell us about a mistake you made is something interesting because what we're really looking for again is self-awareness, recovery, and outlook. So that is to say, you understood you made a mistake, but you were able to recover from it. Even if that recovery said, I made a huge mistake and I had to talk to my supervisor and they had to fix it. And then you need to tell us what you learned. So how do you answer it? Well, the first thing is you probably want to choose a small but relevant mistake unless there's a really good reason for it. Like if you caused $50 million in damages due to negligence, you probably do not want to put that into the interview. It can be school related. So you can talk about something in a group project, you can talk about something in a project or an exam, and that's fine, especially if you've never had a professional experience before. You can relate this back to school, personal life, hobbies, whatever it is, as long as it is relevant. And the key is to keep it professional and to tell us about what you've learned. So here's an example. It's a clerical error, and in fact this happened to me, so I'm happy to share it. And I was tasked with coming up with a seating plan that would maintain social distancing in the COVID-19 pandemic, but I misread the scale on the floor plan and my numbers were too low. So I acknowledge there's a mistake. It's pretty minor. It didn't really cause any problems, especially because I can tell the person we hadn't implemented the floor plan yet. When I recognized the error, I made sure to bring it to my supervisor right away with a revised plan. So this is me talking about the recovery. Not only did I say, hey, I made a mistake, I said, I made a mistake, but here's actually what we should have done. Can we review it? And now I ensure that I check with a colleague in critical situations first. So now I'm talking about the learning that I did, that I'm growing and moving on because I said, well, that was a big mistake. I shouldn't have made that. That was a misreading of a scale on a map. I'm now going to just double check, right? Another set of eyes. What about behavioral questions? So sometimes we do ask behavioral questions, and these are questions of the lines, if you were in this situation, what would you do? And there are 3 tips I have for you. The first is to keep them relevant. Keep your answers relevant to the company. So if the company is asking about how you would deal with your clients, and you say, well, I really enjoy working on my particular hobbies, and here's how I would answer that when I'm dealing with a friend, that's not the question they're asking. Keep it relevant. You should always research the company culture and also their clients. So some companies will have a different answer to this question. As an example, if I ask a behavioral question to a potential teaching assistant candidate, and it's all about how you would deal with a student in distress, and you say to me, well, that student really shouldn't even be in my office, then that's a problem, right? That indicates to me you don't understand my clients, you don't understand my students. Finally, you need to make sure that they understand that you understand them. That is to say, you need to make sure that you've done your research and that comes through so the person on the other end of the table doesn't sit there saying, well, that was just a canned answer. They just made that up on the spot or whatever it is, that you really got it. So here's an example. How do you handle an irate client? Like what happens if you have an irritated client in front of you? So now you have to think, well, clients give the company money, and so I don't want to say, I'll just tell him to go figure himself out. It's not my problem, right? That's not the appropriate answer. Also, not the appropriate answer is, well, sometimes clients can be very troubling or whatever it happens to be, and you start talking about how some clients are more difficult to deal with than others. You don't want to talk about that. What you do want to talk about is that you understand that the clients are important. So here's an example. Well, it's very important to make sure the client knows that they're being listened to. Clients don't become irritated unless they perceive something is wrong. So I'll start by asking for as much information as they're willing to give. This is key here. Notice how I didn't say I'll start by asking every question I can. It's just as much information as the client is willing to give, because I know that asking questions typically can make the client more irritated. I'll consider what they're saying and ensure that I'll get them an answer quickly, or if I can't answer it, I will ensure that I personally connect them with someone who can. That is to say, I'm not just going to shove it off to a generic email address and hope for the best. I'm going to follow up. Then I say something like, there's no wrong door in client relationship management. And that's a key phrase. What it means in terms of no wrong door means that no matter who you ask, they should be able to help connect you to the person who can solve your problem, even if they can't. And that's just sort of saying that I understand what the job is. I get it. Here's an interesting one, which is there anything else we should know about you? This is something I'd like to get across to you. The interview means the job is yours to lose, not yours to gain. They're probably interviewing 10 candidates for one position, maybe 5 candidates for one position. They're looking for a reason to reject you. So, if you forgot to say something that you think would really push you over, or you forgot to say something or you made a mistake, and that's where you can really recover from that, this is where that question is going to help you. It's an opportunity to talk about why the job excites you, right? Just to rehash something. Maybe you didn't feel as though you seemed very excited when they asked you that first question about why you want to work here. So now you can just turn that over and say, you know what? I love web design. I think it's fascinating, and I think that a really well-designed website is something that is a goal of mine that I want to learn how to do, and I think this job can really get me there. Just to show that enthusiasm if you made that mistake. Also, why your skills are relevant, or if there are additional skills you think would be helpful that they weren't asked. So if someone says, tell us about your experience in web design, you do, and then you say, oh, but also I have some experience working on back-end servers, so I understand how the entire process works from the full stack web development. What you're really saying isn't that I want to work on those things. You're saying that I get it. So when I start talking to other people in your company, I'm going to help with that. For many, many jobs, you probably have skills that they're not specifically looking for, but that are going to help you. And then you can really fix any errors that you think you've made. Now, don't do this by saying, well, I made a mistake in the interview. I think that I need to say X, Y, and Z instead. What you should say is, when you asked me about the skills that I had, and I only talked about one piece of software that I've used, I've actually used several others, and here they are. Right, so that's an opportunity for you to expand on an answer, to fix a mistake you don't think you did very well on, and so on. And I have been in many different interviewing situations where the candidate has actually recovered enough to get the job by asking this question. Here's an interesting one. The interviewer will typically ask you, well, do you have any questions? It is always good to ask some, unless they've been interacting with you throughout the entire interview process. So if the interviewer, for example, is explaining the job to you and you say, oh, that's interesting, so does that mean X, Y, and Z? You're sort of asking it throughout the interview process. If that's the case, what you're going to say is, actually, you've answered all of my questions throughout the interview, and I think that we've had a good discussion about that, so I don't have any questions, and that's fine. If you haven't been doing that and you have no questions about the position, that's a little bit weird. It's not exactly a red flag. It's not going to lose you the position, but if I'm looking for a reason to reject you, that might be enough. Now, it's pretty obvious when you've prepared a specific one. There's some career websites that tell you to ask questions like, what are 3 things a successful candidate does in this job? Or what can I do to succeed in this industry? Whatever it happens to be. It sounds fake. It is fake because it's not really a question that you're asking because you're interested. It's a question you're asking because someone told you to. If you're actually interested in a question like, how do I get a foothold in this industry? Then you should ask questions like, well, how did you get into the industry? You should ask genuine, actual questions. Imagine as though this were a networking event instead, and you're just curious, and there's no pressure to get a job, and you were talking to someone in the industry. What would you ask them? Right? That is a different thing from, I've prepared this question, obviously, for the interview. You should have something prepared. You should keep it short. If you have some important logistical questions, now is also the time. It is not a problem if you have a question about, say, salary or days off, that sort of thing. You can ask that, but also be careful. For instance, don't say, well, I notice the salary is $10,000, but I'd actually prefer 20. Well, that's a little bit different. Also, don't say things like, can I take the first 2 months off because I actually have to go travel the world? Those sorts of questions are huge red flags, right? You need to be very careful with what you're asking. But if you ask a question like, is there a possibility for me to shift some hours onto Thursday so I could take a little bit of extra time on Fridays? That's a very different question because you're not trying to avoid the responsibility. You're just trying to move around how you work. You're trying to talk about your scheduling, that sort of thing. So that's okay. Just be careful that sometimes if you ask a question, it might be a red flag in its own. So go out and practice. If you have any questions, please put a comment below and I will happily answer them for you. But one of the most important things is if you can sit in front of your friends and they can start asking you these questions and you can start practicing. Remember that an interview is an opportunity for you to get the person to know, like, and trust you. And so the more practice you have just getting people to understand your own interests and skills, that's really going to go far and help you.